Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Rebecca Callahan, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. I have a PhD in studying wild animals, especially the dangerous ones like bears and wolves. Most people think that makes me brave, but the truth is, I moved to West Virginia because I was running away from something that happened in Wyoming. A grizzly bear almost killed me there, and I needed somewhere quiet to heal. Blackwater Falls. State Park seemed perfect. The mountains here are old and peaceful, covered in thick forests of hemlock trees. There's a beautiful waterfall that drops 500 feet into a canyon so deep you can barely see the bottom. The Cherokee people who lived here first called this place sacred, but also dangerous. They had stories about something they called Kekle Kudle, which means fire bearer. Local folks still whisper about mountain devils in these woods. I never believed any of that. In my line of work, you learn that most monster stories come from people who don't understand animal behavior. A bear walking on its back legs looks pretty scary in the dark. An owl's cry can sound like a woman screaming. There's always a logical explanation. That changed on November 15th, 1984. I was doing my morning rounds when I got a radio call from Jenny Martinez, one of the newer rangers. Her voice was shaky. "Rebecca, you need to get down to the canyon rim. We found something weird." I drove my truck as far as the trail would allow, then hiked the last mile through snow that was starting to stick. Jenny was waiting by the overlook with two hikers who looked pale and scared. They pointed down toward the waterfall. "Tell her what you told me," Jenny said. The older hiker, a man in his 50s with expensive gear, cleared his throat. "We were setting up camp last night when we heard something. Not howling exactly, more like, singing? But no human could make that sound. His morning, we found these. He led me to a clearing about 50 yards from the falls. What I saw there made my blood run cold, and I've seen a lot of dead animals in my career. 7 deer were arranged in a perfect circle around a large oak tree. Not just killed and left there, arranged. Each one was positioned exactly the same way, heads pointing toward the center, bodies untouched, except for precise cuts that had drained all the blood. The ground around them was completely clean, like someone had swept it. "Could be poachers," I said, but my voice didn't sound convincing even to me. "Some kind of ritual hunting thing." Jenny shook her head. "Look at the tree." Carved into the bark, about 12 feet up, were claw marks. 5 parallel grooves, each one 4 inches long and deep enough to gouge out chunks of wood. The spacing between them suggested something with an 8-foot wingspan had made them. "What kind of animal can reach that high?" the hiker asked. I didn't have an answer. Bears can climb, but not straight up a smooth trunk like that. Eagles have talons, but nothing big enough to make marks that size. I took photos and measurements, trying to stay professional while my mind raced through possibilities. The weirdest part was the silence. Usually, when you find dead animals in the woods, there are scavengers nearby. Ravens, crows, possums. Something should have been feeding. But this place was completely quiet. Even the wind seemed to avoid the clearing. I sent the hikers on their way and called the state wildlife office. My supervisor, Tom Bradley, listened to my report without comment. "Sounds like kids playing pranks," he said finally. "Halloween was just 2 weeks ago. Probably some teenagers trying to scare people." "Tom, no teenager carved marks 12 feet up a tree trunk." "Then it's poachers with weird ideas about intimidation. File the report and keep an eye on the area. If it happens again, we'll investigate further." But I couldn't let it go. That night, I drove back to the canyon with my gear. Night vision scope, trail cameras, sampling kit. Everything I used for tracking problem bears. I set up cameras around the clearing and hiked down into the canyon itself, something most visitors never do because it requires technical climbing skills. The bottom of the canyon was like being in a different world. The waterfall thundered down the rock face, sending up clouds of mist that made everything slippery and hard to see. Massive boulders formed a maze of passages and hiding spots. But what caught my attention were the caves. I'd been working in these mountains for 3 years and never knew there were caves down here. The entrance was hidden behind the waterfall, just a dark opening in the rock that you'd never spot from above. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The cave was bigger than it looked from outside, with tunnels leading off in different directions. The walls were covered in strange markings, not the claw marks I'd found on the tree, but something older. Symbols and drawings that looked like they'd been made with charcoal or dried blood. In the center of the main chamber was another arrangement. Bones this time, mostly from deer and small animals, but some that looked disturbingly human-shaped. They were stacked in a spiral pattern around a natural pit in the cave floor. The pit was so deep my flashlight beam couldn't reach the bottom. I took more photos and headed back outside. The hike up the canyon wall in the dark was exhausting, but I made it to my truck just as the first fat snowflakes started falling. The Weather Service had been predicting a major storm, the kind that could dump 3 feet of snow and cut off the park from the outside world for days. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the trees. Every few minutes I'd catch a glimpse of movement in my rearview mirror, like a huge shadow crossing the road behind me. But when I stopped and looked back, there was nothing there except falling snow and empty forest. The storm hit that night like nothing I'd ever seen. By morning, there was already 2 feet of snow on the ground and more coming down hard. The power was out at the ranger station, and the roads were impassable. I was officially stuck until the plows could get through, which might be days. I spent the morning trying to reach my trail cameras remotely, but something was wrong with the signal. Static filled the radio whenever I aimed it toward the canyon. My cell phone showed no service, which wasn't unusual in bad weather, but this felt different. The interference had a pattern to it, like breathing. Around noon, I got a call on the emergency radio. A group of college students had gone missing. They'd been staying at the Blackwater Lodge and went out for a winter hike yesterday afternoon. When they didn't come back, the lodge manager waited until morning to call for help because of the storm. "How many?" I asked. 4 kids from West Virginia University. They signed out for the Lindy Point Trail, but that's all we know. Lindy Point was a popular overlook that offered great views of the canyon, but in weather like this, it was a death trap. The trail was narrow and icy, with steep drop-offs on both sides. I'd pulled bodies off those rocks before. I loaded my rescue gear and headed out on snowshoes. The wind was so strong it knocked me sideways every few steps, and the snow was coming down so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. Following the trail markers was almost impossible, but I knew these woods well enough to navigate by instinct. It took me 2 hours to reach Lindy Point. The overlook was empty except for a backpack half buried in snow. I dug it out and found a WVU student ID for someone named Marcus Chen. There were energy bar wrappers and an empty water bottle, GNs that someone had been here recently. I followed footprints leading away from the overlook toward the canyon rim. The tracks were confused and overlapping, like the group had been running or struggling. They ended at the edge of a cliff that dropped straight down into the mist below. "Hello?" I shouted into the wind. "Can anyone hear me?" My voice echoed off the canyon walls, but there was no answer. I set up a rappelling anchor and prepared to descend, even though the conditions were borderline suicidal. These kids could be hurt and freezing down there. The climb down was a nightmare. Ice had formed on the rock face, making every handhold treacherous. The rope was stiff and hard to manage in the cold. Halfway down, I heard something that made me stop and listen, singing. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but definitely there. A low, haunting melody that seemed to come from inside the canyon itself. The sound sent chills down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I reached the bottom and found them. 3 of the 4 students were huddled together in a shallow cave, barely conscious from hypothermia. The 4th, a girl with blonde hair, was about 20 feet away from the group. She was sitting upright against a boulder, completely still. I ran to her first. "Hey, can you hear me? What's your name?" When I touched her shoulder, she toppled over sideways. Her eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. She'd been dead for hours, maybe all night, but there wasn't a mark on her that I could see. "Help, please," one of the other students whispered. I turned to the 3 survivors. They were in bad shape but alive. The tallest one, who matched the ID from the backpack, tried to sit up when he saw me. "Marcus, I'm Rebecca, a park ranger. You're going to be okay." "It killed Sarah," he mumbled through chattering teeth. "We saw it. The thing with wings." I assumed he was hallucinating from the cold and exposure. Hypothermia can cause all kinds of confusion and paranoia. I got them wrapped in emergency blankets and started the slow process of warming them up. "What happened up there?" I asked while I worked. "We were taking pictures at the overlook," Marcus said. "Sarah wanted to get closer to the edge for a better shot. Then the snow got really bad, and we couldn't find the trail back." One of the other students, a girl with dark hair, grabbed my arm. "It came out of the sky. Huge wings, bigger than any bird. It sang to her." "Like a siren," the third student added. "Sarah just walked toward it like she was hypnotized. We tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. Then it grabbed her and flew away." "When did you see Sarah again?" I asked, glancing at the dead girl's body. "This morning," Marcus said. "It brought her back. Just placed her there and left, like it was returning something it didn't want anymore." I didn't know what to make of their story. Severe hypothermia and stress could cause shared hallucinations, especially in a survival situation. But something about the way they told it, the consistent details, made me uneasy. It took 3 trips to get all of them up the canyon wall. I had to use a complex pulley system and my emergency climbing gear, working through the afternoon while the storm raged overhead. By the time I got the last survivor to the top, it was getting dark. I loaded them into my truck and drove carefully back to the ranger station, where the emergency generator was still running. I called for medical evacuation, but the helicopter couldn't fly in these conditions. The students would have to wait until morning. While they slept in the heated break room, I examined Sarah's body more carefully. What I found made no sense at all. There were no obvious injuries, no signs of violence or trauma. But her body temperature was far too low, even accounting for being outside all night. It was like she'd been flash frozen. Her skin had a strange blue-gray tint that I'd never seen before, and when I lifted her eyelids, her pupils were completely dilated. Most disturbing of all were the tiny puncture marks on her neck, barely visible unless you knew where to look. They were arranged in a perfect pattern, 5 small holes that matched the spacing of the claw marks I'd found on the tree. I covered her body and stepped outside for some air. The snow had finally stopped and the clouds were starting to clear. As I looked up at the stars, something blotted them out. A shadow passed overhead, too large and moving too deliberately to be clouds. It circled the ranger station 3 times, never making a sound except for the whisper of air moving over leathery surfaces. In the dim light from the generator, I caught a glimpse of something impossible, wings that spanned at least 15 feet, attached to a body that looked almost human. Then it was gone, disappearing toward the canyon like it had never been there at all. I stood in the snow for a long time, staring at the empty sky and trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. Something was living in those caves. Something that had been there long before park rangers and hiking trails and college students. And it was awake. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made me jump. Branches breaking under snow, the generator kicking on and off, the building settling in the cold. I kept thinking about what the students had said about singing, and about that shadow passing overhead. The medical helicopter finally arrived at dawn, and I sent the 3 survivors to the hospital in Charleston. They were suffering from severe hypothermia and frostbite, but they'd live. Before Marcus left, he grabbed my sleeve. "You believe us, don't you? About what we saw?" I wanted to say no, to give him the standard rational explanation about stress and cold playing tricks on his mind, but looking into his eyes, I couldn't lie. "I'm going to investigate," I told him. "That's all I can promise." After they left, I had to deal with Sarah's body and the official report. Bradley drove up from the state office, along with a detective from the Charleston police. They listened to my account with the kind of polite skepticism I'd expected. Exposure, the detective said, signing off on Sarah's death certificate. Happens every winter. Kids think they're invincible, then Mother Nature reminds them otherwise. What about the survivors' stories? I asked. They all saw something. Tom shrugged. Group hysteria. When people are scared and cold, they see all kinds of things. Remember that Bigfoot sighting last year? Turned out to be a guy in a ghillie suit. They were wrong, but I couldn't prove it yet. After they left with Sarah's body, I started my real investigation. I drove back to the canyon with every piece of scientific equipment I could get my hands on. Electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, motion sensors, even a Geiger counter in case this had something to do with radiation. The first thing I noticed was that my trail cameras were missing, all 6 of them, gone without a trace. The trees where I'd mounted them were undamaged, but the cameras had been removed with surgical precision. No broken straps, no scattered pieces. Someone or something had deliberately taken them. I set up new equipment and hiked down into the canyon. In daylight, the cave behind the waterfall looked different. Bigger, with more tunnels leading deeper underground than I'd realized. I followed the main passage for about 100 yards before my flashlight beam revealed something that made me stop cold. The bone arrangement I'd found before had been changed. The spiral pattern was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like an altar. Dozens of animal skulls were stacked in a pyramid, with the human-looking bones arranged around the base in geometric patterns. At the center was something new. Sarah's student ID card, placed carefully on top of the pile. I took photos and collected samples, trying to stay scientific despite the fear crawling up my spine. The bones showed strange markings, not tooth marks from scavengers, but deliberate cuts made by something with razor-sharp claws. Some of the skulls had small holes drilled through them, like the puncture marks I'd found on Sarah's neck. Deeper in the cave, I found evidence of long-term habitation, areas where the rock was worn smooth, as if something large had been sleeping there for years. Scratch marks on the walls that formed patterns too complex to be random. And everywhere, that strange smell, musty and organic, like wet leather mixed with copper. I was setting up an infrared camera when I heard the singing again. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the cave system, echoing off the stone walls in a way that made it impossible to pinpoint the source. The melody was beautiful and terrible at the same time, with harmonies that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my bones. Against every instinct I had, I followed the sound. The main tunnel split into 3 smaller passages. I chose the one where the singing seemed loudest and followed it downward through a maze of natural chambers. The air got warmer as I descended, and that leather and copper smell got stronger. After what felt like hours, I reached a massive underground chamber. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls, but in the circle of light directly in front of me, I saw paintings. They covered every surface, the walls, the floor, even large rocks scattered around the chamber. Some looked ancient, done in charcoal and what might have been blood, showing stick figures being carried away by winged shapes. Others were newer, maybe decades old, depicting the same creatures in more detail. The newest paintings were the most disturbing. They showed the modern world, cars, buildings, people in contemporary clothing, all being destroyed by things with wings and claws. In the center of the newest section was a portrait that made my blood freeze. It was me, perfect in every detail, showing me standing in this exact chamber with my flashlight. And surrounding the painting were dozens of tally marks scratched into the stone. Someone or something had been watching me, counting my visits, planning. The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something moving in the darkness beyond my light, something large, breathing slowly and deliberately. I swept my flashlight in a wide arc, but saw nothing except empty stone and shadows. Then I heard Tom Bradley's voice calling my name from somewhere far above. I ran. The trip back through the tunnels was a nightmare of wrong turns and dead ends. Whatever I'd sensed in that chamber was following me, staying just outside my light but close enough that I could hear its breathing. Twice I felt something brush against my back, and once I swear I felt claws tangle briefly in my hair. I burst out of the cave entrance, gasping and shaking, nearly colliding with Tom, who was standing by the waterfall with 2 state troopers. "Rebecca, thank God," he said. "When you didn't answer your radio, we thought something had happened." I looked back at the cave entrance. It was empty, but I could see 2 points of light glowing in the darkness. Eyes watching us from just inside the tunnel. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now." "What's wrong? What did you find down there?" Before I could answer, one of the troopers pointed at the sky. "What the hell is that?" We all looked up. Something was circling overhead, too high to make out clearly, but obviously not a bird. It moved with purpose, riding the thermal currents rising from the canyon with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. "Probably a turkey vulture," Tom said, but his voice was uncertain. The thing above us let out a cry that echoed off the canyon walls, the same haunting melody I'd heard in the cave, but louder and more complex. It sounded like singing and screaming at the same time. "That's no vulture," one of the troopers said, reaching for his radio. But before he could call it in, the thing folded its wings and dove. It came down fast, straight toward us, and for a few seconds I got a clear look at it. It was massive, easily 9 feet tall, with wings that stretched 15 feet from tip to tip. The body was humanoid but wrong, with elongated limbs and skin that looked like dark leather. Its face was the worst part. Almost human, but with eyes that glowed with their own light, and a mouth full of teeth that belonged on a shark. At the last second, it pulled out of the dive and soared past us, close enough that the wind from its wings knocked Tom to the ground. As it flew away, it let out another cry, and this time I could swear I heard words in it, ancient words in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. It was claiming territory, warning us away. The troopers were already drawing their weapons, but the creature was gone, disappeared into the maze of rock formations on the far side of the canyon. "Did you see that?" one of them asked. "See what?" Tom said, getting to his feet. He looked genuinely confused, like he'd missed the whole thing. I stared at him. "The creature. The thing that just flew over us." "I saw a bird, maybe an eagle, but you're acting like you saw a dragon or something." The troopers looked at each other uncomfortably. One of them, a young guy with a name tag that read Martinez, nodded slowly. "I saw it too. That wasn't any bird." But his partner was shaking his head. "Looked like a vulture to me. Maybe a big one, but nothing unusual." I realized that the creature was somehow affecting perception, making some people see it clearly while others saw only what their minds could accept. That's how it had stayed hidden all these years, how the legends had remained just stories. "We need to evacuate the park," I said. "Close all the trails, get everyone out." Tom laughed. "Because of a big bird?" "Because 3 people are already dead, and that thing is hunting." The argument that followed was predictable. Tom wanted proof. Photos, video, something concrete he could show his supervisors. The troopers wanted to file a report about strange wildlife behavior. Everyone wanted a rational explanation, but I knew the truth now. Something ancient lived in the caves beneath Blackwater Falls, something that had been sleeping until the recent weather pattern woke it up. It was intelligent, territorial, and very, very hungry, and we were all potential prey. That night, I went home and did research, real research, the kind I should have done from the beginning. I drove to the county library and dug through historical records, newspaper archives, and Cherokee oral histories that had been preserved by local scholars. What I found painted a terrifying picture. Every 20 to 30 years, going back more than a century, there were reports of missing hikers and strange deaths around Blackwater Falls. The details were always similar. People found dead without obvious injuries, witnesses claiming to see flying creatures, and unexplained disappearances during severe weather. The Cherokee records were more specific. According to their legends, Kekle Kudla was one of the first ones, ancient beings that ruled the earth before humans arrived. Most had died out or gone into deep sleep, but a few remained hidden in sacred places. They were described as guardians of the boundary between the living world and the realm of the dead. But these weren't benevolent spirits. The legends made it clear that Keklikudli fed on human fear and flesh, and that it only woke during times of great cold when the boundary between worlds was thinnest. The last major outbreak had been in 1954 during a blizzard that killed dozens of people across the region. 7 hikers had gone missing near Blackwater Falls, and their bodies were never found. After that, the Cherokee elders had performed a binding ritual, hoping to send the creature back to sleep. Apparently, it hadn't worked permanently. I was reading a 1920s newspaper account when my phone rang. It was Martinez, the state trooper who'd seen the creature clearly. "Rebecca, we've got a problem. 3 more people went missing tonight." My heart sank. "Where?" "A family from Maryland was staying at the lodge. Parents and their teenage daughter. They went out for a night hike after dinner, said they wanted to see the falls by moonlight. That was 4 hours ago." I grabbed my gear and met Martinez at the lodge. The manager, a nervous man in his 60s, showed us the family's cabin. Their luggage was still there, dinner dishes half finished on the table. It looked like they'd just stepped out for a quick walk. "They seemed like experienced hikers," the manager said. "Good equipment, knew about the weather, but they were excited about some story another guest told them." "What story?" "Something about a legendary creature that only appears during full moons. The other guest said he'd seen it flying over the canyon earlier today." Martinez and I exchanged looks. The creature was deliberately luring people now, using human curiosity against them. We followed the family's trail by flashlight. Their footprints led directly to the canyon overlook, then stopped at the edge. But this time, there were other tracks, massive impressions in the snow that looked like a combination of human feet and bird talons. "We need backup," Martinez said. But when he tried his radio, all he got was static. The electromagnetic interference was getting stronger. My compass spun wildly, and my GPS showed impossible readings. We were being cut off from the outside world, isolated just like the creature's other victims. That's when we heard the singing. It was coming from multiple directions now, harmonizing with itself in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The melody was beautiful and hypnotic, and I felt myself taking a step toward the canyon edge before I caught myself. "Don't listen," I told Martinez. "It's how it hunts. The song makes you want to follow it." But Martinez was staring into the canyon with a dreamy expression. "Do you hear that? It's beautiful. We should go down there." I grabbed his arm and shook him hard. "No, it's not beautiful. It's dangerous. That thing killed Sarah, and now it's trying to kill us." The singing got louder, more insistent. Now I could see shapes moving in the darkness below, not one creature but several, circling the canyon like sharks in water. Whatever had awakened wasn't alone. "How many of them are there?" Martinez whispered. Before I could answer, something landed on the overlook behind us. I turned slowly, afraid of what I'd see. The creature stood about 20 feet away, fully visible in the moonlight. Up close, it was even more terrifying than I'd imagined. Its skin was the color of dried blood, stretched tight over bones that were too long and jointed in the wrong places. The wings were folded against its back, but I could see the razor-sharp claws at each joint. Its face was the worst part. Almost human, but wrong in every detail. Eyes like burning coals, a mouth that split too wide and revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. When it looked at me, I felt like it was seeing through my skin to the fear underneath. "You have been watching us," it said in a voice like grinding stone. "You have been in our home." It could talk. Somehow that made it even more terrifying. "This is our territory," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're the one who doesn't belong here." The creature tilted its head, studying me like a curious bird. "We were here before your kind crawled from the mud. We have slept in the deep places, waiting for the turning of the world. Now the cold has awakened us, and we hunger." More shapes dropped from the sky around us. I counted at least 6 of them, maybe more lurking in the darkness. They moved with predatory grace, staying just out of reach while they surrounded us. "Where's the family?" I demanded. "What did you do with them?" "They came to us willingly," the leader said. "The song called and they answered, as you will answer." The creatures began to sing again, and this time the melody was so powerful I felt my knees buckle. Martinez took a step toward them, then another. I could see the Maryland family now standing at the edge of the group like sleepwalkers. They were alive but completely under the creature's control. I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled out my flare gun and fired it directly at the lead creature. The flare struck it in the chest and exploded in a burst of red fire. The creature shrieked and stumbled backward, its skin smoking where the flare had hit. The other creatures stopped singing and scattered, taking flight with powerful wing beats that sent snow swirling around us. "The light!" I yelled to Martinez. "They don't like bright light!" I fired my backup flare into the air, and the creatures retreated further. In the sudden illumination, I could see the Maryland family blinking in confusion, like they were waking up from a dream. But our victory was temporary. The flares would only last a few minutes, and then we'd be back in darkness with 6 very angry predators. "We need to get back to the trucks," I said. "Everyone, stay close together and move fast." We ran through the snow, half carrying the confused family members. Behind us, I could hear the creatures regrouping, their cries echoing off the canyon walls. They were hurt and angry, but far from defeated. We made it to the parking area just as my second flare burned out. I got everyone into my truck and started the engine, but as we pulled away, something slammed into the roof hard enough to dent the metal. One of the creatures was riding on top of us, its claws screeching against steel as it tried to tear through. I swerved hard left, then right, trying to throw it off. Through the windshield, I could see it, its face pressed against the glass, those burning eyes staring directly into mine. Then Martinez leaned out the passenger window with his service pistol and emptied the entire clip into the creature's body. It shrieked and fell away, tumbling into the ditch beside the road. We drove in silence for several minutes before anyone spoke. "Is it dead?" the Maryland father asked. I looked in the rear-view mirror. The creature was already getting to its feet, wounded but very much alive, and in the distance I could see the others taking flight, following us. "No," I said. "But we heard it. And now they know we can fight back." We made it to the state police barracks in Davis, about 40 miles from the park. I convinced them to set up roadblocks around Blackwater Falls and declare it a temporary disaster area. Officially, it was due to dangerous weather conditions and unstable terrain. Unofficially, Martinez and I knew we were buying time to figure out how to deal with something that shouldn't exist. The Maryland family was taken to the hospital for observation. They remembered nothing after hearing the singing, which was probably a mercy. The media was told they'd gotten lost in the storm and suffered from exposure-induced hallucinations. 3 days later, the creatures disappeared. I went back to the canyon with a full search team, including state wildlife officers and even a few federal agents who asked too many questions. We found the caves empty, the bone arrangements scattered, the strange paintings covered with fresh rockfall that looked deliberately placed. The deeper chambers were sealed off by what appeared to be a natural cave-in, but I knew better. The creatures had retreated to whatever depths they'd come from, going back to sleep until the next time the conditions were right. Tom Bradley was relieved. The official report blamed everything on a pack of feral dogs and some very unusual weather patterns. Case closed, no more awkward questions about flying monsters. But I knew the truth, and I couldn't let it go. I spent the next 2 years studying everything I could find about the creatures. I learned that they weren't unique to Blackwater Falls. Similar legends existed throughout the Appalachian Mountains, always connected to deep caves and severe weather. The Cherokee called them by different names, but the descriptions were consistent: ancient predators that fed on human fear and only woke during times of environmental stress. Climate change was making those stress events more common. Stronger storms, colder winters, more extreme weather patterns. Each one was a potential trigger for creatures that had been sleeping for decades. I also learned that I wasn't the first park ranger to encounter them. There were others scattered across different forests and different decades who'd filed similar reports that were quietly buried by bureaucrats who couldn't accept the truth. We started an informal network, sharing information and monitoring the known hibernation sites. When unusual disappearances cluster around certain locations during severe weather, we investigate. When we find evidence of the creature's awakening, we find ways to drive them back into hibernation. It's not a perfect system. We can't save everyone, and we can't kill things that have survived for thousands of years. But we can protect people by understanding the patterns and preparing for the next awakening. I'm still a park ranger, still working in the mountains I love. But now I know that some of the legends are true, and some of the dark places in these hills are darker than anyone imagines. The caves beneath Blackwater Falls are sealed now, at least for the moment. I have motion sensors and cameras hidden throughout the area, monitoring for any signs of activity. So far, everything has been quiet. But I know they're still down there, sleeping in the deep places, waiting for the next big storm to wake them. And when that happens, I'll be ready. And because someone has to stand guard between the monsters and the people who just want to enjoy the beauty of these ancient mountains, someone has to know the truth about what lives in the darkness, even if they can never tell anyone else. My name is Rebecca Callahan, and I've been protecting people from things they don't want to believe in for over 15 years now. Some nights, when the wind is howling through the canyon and the temperature drops below freezing, I still hear them singing in my dreams. And I know that somewhere deep underground, they're dreaming too, dreaming of the day they'll rise again to hunt under starlit skies. Until then, I'll keep watching. Because the mountains are beautiful, but they're also dangerous in ways most people can't imagine. And that's a responsibility I'll carry for the rest of my life. My name is Michael Hartwell, and I've been a park ranger at Shenandoah National Park for 21 years. Before that, I worked as a paramedic in Richmond until my partner got shot during a drug bust gone wrong. I needed mountains after that. I needed quiet places where the worst thing that could happen was a broken ankle or a bee sting. Old Rag Mountain became my home. It's the most popular hike in the whole park, and also the most dangerous. The rock scramble near the top has claimed more twisted ankles and scraped knees than I can count. But that's normal danger, the kind you can see coming and prepare for. I never believed the old stories about Raven Rock Hollow. Every mountain has its ghost tales, and this one was no different. Local Cherokee folks would shake their heads when hikers asked about the area. Children went missing there long ago, they'd say. Still missing. But I figured it was just history getting mixed up with imagination, the way stories do. The morning Emma Kozlov went missing started like any other May Day in 1982. I was checking my rescue gear when the call came in. 7-year-old girl, separated from her family during yesterday's hike, last seen near the rock scramble around 4 p.m., right before those sudden thunderstorms hit. 24 hours, I told Emma's parents when I met them at the trailhead. Her mother had red eyes from crying all night. Her father kept checking his watch like time might suddenly slow down if he stared hard enough. First, 24 hours are the most important. Kids are tougher than you think. I meant it. In 2 decades of mountain rescue, I'd found lost children hiding under logs, curled up in caves, even swimming in beaver ponds. They usually stayed put once they realized they were lost, which made them easier to find than adults who kept walking and made things worse. But something felt wrong from the start. The storm had washed out most tracks, but I found small footprints near the last boulder where Emma's family remembered seeing her. She'd been wearing pink sneakers with white laces. Easy to spot. The prints led toward Raven Rock, which made sense. Kids always wanted to explore the biggest, most interesting rocks. Then the prints stopped, not faded or washed away by rain. They just ended, like Emma had suddenly learned to fly. I circled the area 3 times, looking for where the trail picked up again. Nothing. The footprints went right up to a solid wall of granite and vanished. Must have climbed up, I told myself, though the rock face was smooth as glass and 12 feet high. No handholds a 7-year-old could use. That's when I saw the handprint. Small fingers pressed into the mud beside the boulder, like someone had steadied themselves before climbing. But the handprint was facing the wrong way. Instead of pointing up toward possible handholds, it pointed straight into the rock. I stared at that print for a long time. The storm had been fierce, but not fierce enough to wash away evidence while leaving a perfect handprint behind. And the mud around it looked fresh, like it had been made that morning instead of yesterday afternoon. A crow called from somewhere above me, but when I looked up, the trees were empty. The sound seemed to come from inside the rocks themselves. 21 years of mountain rescue had taught me to trust my instincts. Right now, those instincts were screaming that something was very wrong with Raven Rock Hollow. But Emma was still out there somewhere, probably scared and hungry, waiting for someone to find her. I radioed for additional search teams and started climbing. By noon, we had 12 searchers working the area around Raven Rock. I'd called in teams from 3 counties, plus a helicopter from Richmond. Standard protocol for a SID, missing child in technical terrain. But nothing about this search felt standard. First, our radios kept cutting out near the rock formations. Static and strange echoes that made simple commands sound like whispers from underground. Tom Bradley, my most experienced tracker, said his compass was spinning like a pinwheel whenever he got close to the main boulder field. Probably iron deposits, I told him, though I'd never seen anything like it in 21 years on this mountain. Then Sarah Chen, our K9 handler, found the backpack. It was wedged in a crack between 2 massive granite slabs, about 30 feet up from where Emma's trail had vanished. A child's pink backpack with cartoon unicorns on it. Emma's parents confirmed it was hers. "How did it get up there?" Sarah asked, staring at the impossible climb. I didn't have an answer. The rocks were smooth and wet from yesterday's storm. Even an experienced climber would need ropes to reach that height safely. A 7-year-old girl couldn't have made that climb alone. We rigged a rope system and rappelled down to retrieve the backpack. Inside, we found Emma's water bottle, half a peanut butter sandwich, and a small notebook where she'd been drawing pictures of flowers. Everything looked normal, except for the last drawing. It showed children holding hands in a circle around a large rock. Stick figures, the way kids draw, but there were too many of them. 12 or 13 children when Emma's family only had 1 child. And at the bottom of the page, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, "They want to play." "Emma!" I called out, my voice echoing off the granite walls. "Emma, can you hear me?" What came back wasn't an echo. It was a child's voice, high and clear, calling, "Here! I'm here!" But the sound came from everywhere at once, from above and below and inside the rocks themselves. Sarah's dog started whining and backing away from the boulder field. The German Shepherd had found dozens of lost people over the years, but now he pressed himself against Sarah's legs and refused to move forward. "Emma," I tried again, "stay where you are. We're coming to get you." This time, multiple voices answered, not just Emma's voice, but other children too, boys and girls, all calling out from different directions. "Help us! We're hiding! Come find us!" Tom Bradley looked at me with wide eyes. "How many kids are we looking for?" Before I could answer, my radio crackled to life. Base camp was calling with an update on the weather. More storms coming in from the west. We had maybe 3 hours before lightning made it too dangerous to have people on the rock faces. 3 hours to find Emma before we'd have to call off the search until morning. I assigned teams to work in expanding circles around the backpack location. Sarah and her dog would check the easier terrain where a frightened child might hide. Tom would work the technical areas where someone might have fallen. But as the team spread out, the voices got stronger. Children laughing somewhere deep in the rocks. Emma calling for her mommy from what sounded like underground caves. Other kids singing songs I didn't recognize, in a language that sounded old and strange. "You hear that too, right?" Tom asked when we met up near the main climbing route. I nodded. The singing was getting clearer now. Not English, but something that felt familiar anyway, like a half-remembered lullaby. That's when I saw them, just for a second, in my peripheral vision. Children playing on rock ledges that were too high and too dangerous for any real kid to reach. When I turned to look directly, they were gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. "Tom," I said quietly, "radio the other teams. Tell them to be extra careful. Something's not right here." He started to ask what I meant, but then we heard Emma's voice again, closer this time, coming from a narrow gap between 2 house-sized boulders. "I'm okay. I'm playing with my new friend." Her voice was cheerful, like she was having the time of her life instead of being lost and alone for 24 hours. "Emma," I called back, "we're going to get you out of there. Can you see daylight?" "They're teaching me games," she replied. "They know all the best hiding places. They've been here for so long." My blood went cold. Emma was 7 years old. She didn't talk like that, and she definitely didn't sound like a child who'd spent a night alone in the wilderness. I squeezed into the gap between the boulders, following her voice. The passage was narrow and twisted, barely wide enough for my shoulders. Water dripped from somewhere above, and the air smelled like wet stone and something else. Something old. Emma? Keep talking, honey. I'm coming to find you. But the only answer was more singing. Children's voices echoing through stone passages that shouldn't exist, singing in a language that made my skin crawl even though I couldn't understand a word. The passage opened into a hidden chamber I'd never seen before, despite 21 years of exploring these rocks. Smooth granite walls curved up into shadows, and thin beams of sunlight filtered down through cracks far above. It felt like being inside a cathedral made of stone. Emma wasn't there. But someone had been. Small handprints covered the walls, pressed into the rock like the stone had been soft as clay when they were made. Some prints looked fresh. Others seemed old, worn smooth by time. And there were drawings, hundreds of them, scratched into the granite with sharp stones. Pictures of children playing, children hiding, children holding hands around fires. But also darker images. Men with guns chasing families through forests, children crying beside rivers, scenes that looked like they came from a very long time ago. "Emma?" I shouted, my voice bouncing wildly around the chamber. "Where are you?" "Learning," came her voice from somewhere deeper in the rocks. "They're teaching me important things." I followed the sound through another passage, this one so narrow I had to turn sideways to fit through. My radio was nothing but static now. If something happened to me down here, the other teams wouldn't even know where to look. The passage led to an even larger chamber, this one with a pool of clear water in the center. And there, sitting on a dry ledge with her feet dangling over the edge, was Emma Kozlov. She looked perfectly fine. Clean clothes, dry hair, bright smile. Like she'd been having a picnic instead of surviving alone in a cave system. "Hi, Mr. Ranger," she said cheerfully. "My friends said you'd find me eventually. They're really good at hiding, but they always let grown-ups find them when it's time to go home. Emma, sweetheart, we need to get you out of here right now. Your parents are very worried." She nodded seriously. "I know. But I had to learn the rules first. They're very important rules." "What rules?" "How to stay warm when it's cold. How to find water when you're thirsty. How to hide when bad men come." She pointed to drawings on the wall behind her. They had to learn those rules a long time ago when soldiers came to their village. The drawings showed the same scenes I'd seen in the first chamber. Families running, children hiding, soldiers with old-fashioned uniforms and weapons. But these pictures were different, more detailed, more real. "Who taught you these rules, Emma?" She pointed to the other side of the chamber where shadows gathered thick despite the light filtering down from above. "My friends. They've been waiting here for someone new to teach. They get lonely sometimes." I looked where she was pointing and saw nothing but darkness. But I could feel them watching, waiting. And slowly, like my eyes were adjusting to dim light, I began to see shapes in the shadows. Children. Dozens of them standing perfectly still against the far wall. Boys and girls in clothes I didn't recognize. Old-fashioned outfits that looked like they came from a history book. Their skin seemed to glow with a pale light, and their eyes reflected the sunbeams like a cat's eyes in headlights. None of them looked older than 12. "Hello?" said a boy who might have been 10, stepping forward from the group. His voice had the same strange accent I'd heard in the singing. "We have been teaching your child survival. She learns quickly." My hand moved automatically to my radio, but it was still dead. We were too deep in the rocks for any signal to reach the surface. "We mean no harm," said a girl with long braids, maybe 8 years old. "We protect children who become lost. We teach them to survive as we had to survive." "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "We are the children of this place," the boy replied. "We lived here when the mountain belonged to our people. We died here when soldiers came to take our land. but we remain to help others who become lost and afraid. Emma slipped down from her ledge and walked over to join the group of strange children. They surrounded her protectively, like siblings looking after their little sister. "They saved me," Emma said matter-of-factly. "When the storm came, I got scared and hid in the rocks, but I got turned around and couldn't find my way out. They found me and brought me somewhere safe and warm. They shared their food and told me stories all night." I stared at the ghostly children gathered around Emma. They looked so real, so solid, but I could see the cave wall through their bodies if I concentrated hard enough. "The storm returns soon," said the girl with braids. "Much rain, much danger. We will show you the safe path to the surface, but you must hurry." Thunder rumbled overhead, confirming her words. The second storm system was moving in faster than predicted. "Come," said the boy, gesturing toward a passage I hadn't noticed before. "We know the way that does not flood." As we moved through the winding passages, more children appeared from the shadows. All of them Cherokee, all dressed in the clothes of another century. They guided us through tunnels and chambers I never could have found alone, pointing out handholds and warning us about loose rocks. "How long have you been here?" I asked the boy who seemed to be their leader. "Since the long winter when the soldiers made our families walk away from home," he replied. "We hid in the rocks, but the cold took us. Our bodies sleep in the deep places, but our spirits remain to help lost children find their way." We climbed steadily upward, following passages that seemed to twist impossibly through solid rock. The children moved like they were weightless, floating over obstacles that Emma and I had to climb carefully. Light began to filter down from above, real daylight, not the strange glow that had filled the deeper chambers. "We must leave you here," said the girl with braids as we reached an opening that led back to familiar territory. "But if children become lost again, we will find them, we will teach them, we will keep them safe until help arrives." Emma hugged each of the ghostly children goodbye, like they were old friends instead of supernatural beings she'd just met. "Thank you for teaching me the rules," she said seriously. "I'll remember them always." The Cherokee children smiled and began to fade, becoming transparent as morning mist. "Remember us too," whispered the boy. "Remember that love does not die, even when bodies do. Remember that some spirits choose to stay and help instead of moving on to rest." And then they were gone, leaving only Emma and me in a narrow canyon between familiar rock formations. I radioed our location as soon as we reached terrain where the signal worked. Within minutes, I could hear the rescue helicopter approaching and Tom Bradley's voice calling our names from somewhere close by. But the storm was coming faster than anyone expected. The sky had turned that ugly green-black color that meant serious weather. Wind as picking up, bending trees and sending loose rocks tumbling down the mountainside. We had maybe 10 minutes before the worst of it hit. "This way," Tom shouted, appearing at the top of a boulder pile. "Helicopters landing at the emergency pad." That's when we heard the other voices, children calling for help, but not from the direction we'd just come. These voices came from all around us, from different parts of the rock scramble where kids could easily get trapped when the flash flood started. "More children are lost," Emma said, tugging on my sleeve. "My friends told me 3 kids got separated from their families when the first storm hit yesterday. They're still hiding in the rocks." My radio crackled with confirmation. 3 separate families had reported children missing, but the reports had gotten mixed up with Emma's case. With the storm coming, we'd focused on finding one child instead of realizing there were others. "Where?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. Emma pointed toward the most dangerous part of the rock scramble, where narrow passages ran between massive boulders. Beautiful hiking when the weather was good, death traps when the rain started, and flash floods filled every crack and crevice. Tommy Michaels, age 9, Sarah Potter, age 6, Kevin Park, age 11, my radio announced. All missing since yesterday afternoon. Last seen near Raven Rock formations. Thunder crashed directly overhead. The first fat raindrops began to fall. "We can't reach them in this weather," Tom said, jogging up to us. "Those passages will be underwater in 20 minutes. We'll have to wait for the storm to pass." But I was looking at Emma, and Emma was looking at something I couldn't see. Her eyes tracked movement through the air, like she was watching invisible people. "They say there's still time," Emma whispered. "The safe passages won't flood for another hour. But we have to hurry." "Who says?" "My friends. They're going to help us find the other children." I stared at the empty air around Emma, seeing nothing but feeling that familiar sensation of being watched. The Cherokee children were still there, still protecting lost kids, even though I couldn't see them anymore. The helicopter pilot was on the radio saying he had to leave in 5 minutes or get grounded by the storm. Standard procedure was to evacuate the found child immediately and come back for the others when it was safe. But when it was safe, might be too late for 3 kids trapped in flooding passages. "Emma," I said, kneeling down to her eye level, "can your friends really show us where the other children are hiding?" She nodded solemnly. "They've been keeping them safe, teaching them how to stay warm and dry. But the water's going to get very deep very soon." I made a decision that violated every safety protocol I'd ever learned. "Tom, get Emma to the helicopter. I'm going after the others." "Michael, that's suicide. You can't navigate those passages in a flash flood." "I won't be alone," I said, looking at Emma. "Will I?" She shook her head. "They'll guide you. They know all the safe ways." Rain was falling harder now, turning the rocks slippery and dangerous. Tom grabbed Emma and started toward the helicopter landing zone, arguing with me over the radio every step of the way. I headed into the boulder field, following invisible guides I had to trust completely. The first child was easy. Tommy Michaels was crammed into a dry alcove about 50 feet from where Emma had been found, scared but unhurt. He said the nice kids had brought him food and told him stories all night. Kevin Park was deeper in the rocks, in a passage that was already starting to fill with runoff from the storm. He was sitting on a narrow ledge about 6 feet above the rising water, crying for his mom. "How did you get up there?" I asked as I rigged a rope to pull him out. "The girl with the long hair helped me climb," he said. "She said the Wabrieux otter was coming and I needed to get high." Sarah Potter was the hardest to reach. She was in a chamber similar to the one where I'd found Emma, but deeper underground and already partially flooded. By the time I got to her, water was up to my waist and rising fast. She was sitting on a rock platform with a ghostly Cherokee boy about her own age, both of them perfectly calm despite the roaring water around them. "Hi, mister," Sarah said cheerfully. "My friend says you know the way out." The Cherokee boy nodded at me seriously. "Follow the high passage. The water does not reach there. But hurry." I grabbed Sarah and followed his directions, carrying her through passages I never could have found alone. Water thundered past us in the lower tunnels, but the route the ghost children showed me stayed dry. We emerged from the rocks just as the full fury of the storm hit. Lightning cracked across the sky, and rain fell in sheets so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. But all 4 children were safe. The helicopter had left, but Tom was waiting with the emergency response team in vehicles that could handle the rough mountain roads. "How did you know where to find them?" he asked as we loaded the kids into the trucks. I looked back at the rocks where I could just barely see translucent figures watching from high ledges. Children who had died protecting their homeland 2 centuries ago, still protecting lost children today. "Someone showed me the way," I said. The official report said that Ranger Michael Hartwell successfully located and rescued 4 missing children using advanced wilderness survival techniques and intimate knowledge of the old Rag Mountain terrain. I received a commendation from the Department of the Interior and a write-up in the local newspaper calling me a mountain rescue hero. But I knew the truth. 3 weeks later, I drove back to Raven Rock on my day off. I brought offerings that Sarah Chen, our Cherokee cultural liaison, had suggested: tobacco, cornmeal, and small toys that children might enjoy. I left them in the chamber where I'd first seen the ghost children, along with a note written in Cherokee that Sarah had helped me translate. "Thank you for protecting the lost ones. Thank you for keeping them safe." When I came back the next week, the offerings were gone. I started learning Cherokee language and customs from Sarah and the elders in her community. They told me stories about the children of Raven Rock Hollow, how they'd hidden in the mountains when soldiers came to force their families west on the Trail of Tears. The kids had been too young to understand why their parents were being taken away. They'd only known to hide in the rocks and wait for their families to come back. The families never came back. The children died during the hard winter that followed, still waiting and still hiding. But their love for other children kept their spirits in this world, protecting any lost child who wandered into their territory. They choose to stay, one elder told me. Love is stronger than death, and children's love is strongest of all. Over the years, I've found 17 more missing children in the Old Rag area. Every single rescue was guided by voices I couldn't quite hear and glimpses of movement I couldn't quite see. The Cherokee children of Raven Rock Hollow have never let me down. Emma Kozlov is 28 now, married with 2 children of her own. She still sends me Christmas cards every year, and sometimes she brings her kids to visit the mountains. She teaches them the rules she learned that day in the caves, how to stay warm, how to find water, how to stay safe when bad things happen. Her daughter asked me once if I believed in ghosts. I told her I believe in love that's stronger than death. I believe in children who care so much about other children that they choose to stay and help even when they could rest. I believe that some places hold on to the spirits of those who love them most. And I believe that when you hear children laughing in the rocks around Raven Rock Hollow, you should stop and listen, because they might be trying to tell you something important. The mountains remember everything, the good and the bad, the living and the dead. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the mountains will share their secrets with you. Just be ready to believe in things that can't be explained, because some stories are too important to be dismissed as imagination. The children of Raven Rock are still there, still watching, still protecting lost ones who need their help, and as long as children get lost in the mountains, they always will be. That's not a ghost story. That's a love story that happens to involve ghosts. And it's absolutely true. My name is Patricia Redwood, and I've been a park ranger at Seneca Rocks for 19 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Rock slides, lightning strikes, tourists who thought flip-flops were good climbing shoes. I'd pulled broken bodies off these cliffs more times than I care to count, but I never believed the stories. The old-timers in the climbing community loved to tell tales about the bone men when they gathered around campfires. How climbers would vanish on routes they'd done 100 times before. How you'd find gear embedded in solid rock faces where no human hand could reach. The Cherokee who lived here first called these cliffs hungry for bones, but I figured that was just poetry. Ancient people trying to explain why mountains are dangerous. I should have listened. September 15th, 1985 started like any other Tuesday. Cool morning air carried the smell of changing leaves, and the quartzite cliffs caught the early sun like giant mirrors. I was checking climbing permits at the ranger station when Tom Murphy's wife called, crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Tom's team never came home," she sobbed. "They were supposed to finish the South Peak route yesterday evening." Tom Murphy knew these rocks better than anyone. He'd been climbing here since the 1960s, back when this place was just a local secret. His team included Sarah Chen, one of the best technical climbers on the East Coast, and Mike Rodriguez, who could free climb routes that most people needed ropes for. These weren't weekend warriors who'd gotten lost or stuck. These were experts. I grabbed my rescue gear and headed up the trail. The silence hit me first. Usually, you'd hear birds, squirrels, the wind whistling through the holds. Today, nothing. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, like the mountain was holding its breath. I found our base camp exactly where it should be. 3 tents, perfectly set up. Dinner still in the pot, barely touched. Their approach shoes lined up neatly outside the tents. Everything normal except for one thing. Their climbing gear was gone. All of it. Tom's wife had mentioned they'd planned to climb the Old Man's Route, a classic 5.7 that followed a natural crack system up the south face. I'd climbed it myself dozens of times. It was challenging, but not dangerous if you knew what you were doing. The approach took me through scrub pines and over loose rock to the base of the cliff. That's where things got strange. I found Tom's lucky chalk bag, a bright red thing his daughter had given him, hanging from a piece of gear 40 feet up the wall, not clipped to a bolt or wedged in a crack. The gear was embedded in solid rock like it had grown there. I stared at that chalk bag for 10 minutes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The quartzite face was smooth at that spot. No cracks, no ledges, nowhere to place protection. Yet there was a perfect cam, a mechanical piece that expands inside cracks, somehow fused into the stone itself. My radio crackled. "Patricia, this is base. Any sign of the missing climbers?" "Found their camp," I replied, not mentioning the impossible gear placement. Continuing the search. I spent the rest of the day scouring the area. No bodies at the base of cliffs, no signs of a fall or accident. Just that red chalk bag hanging 40 feet up on a route that should have been routine for climbers of their skill level. As evening approached, I noticed something else. The temperature was dropping faster than it should. The rocks themselves felt cold, even where the sun had been hitting them all day. And there was a smell, faint but wrong, like old bones left out in the rain. I've done enough mountain rescues to know when someone's beyond help, but Tom's team had simply vanished, leaving behind only their camping gear and one impossible piece of evidence embedded in living stone. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that chalk bag, bright red against the gray quartzite. In 19 years of climbing and rescue work, I'd never seen anything like it. Gear doesn't embed itself in solid rock. Physics doesn't work that way. But something had put it there. The next morning brought 3 more climbing teams to Seneca Rocks. Word about Tom's disappearance hadn't spread yet, and I wasn't about to panic people without more information. I posted notices about the missing climbers and asked everyone to report any unusual findings, but I kept the details vague. Lisa and Jeff Hamilton were celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary with a climb up the Gunsight Notch route. They'd driven down from Pittsburgh, and Lisa was glowing with excitement about finally tackling a route she'd been training for all summer. "This is going to be perfect," she told me while I checked their permits. "Weather's clear, rock's dry, and Jeff finally bought us new gear for the trip." I almost warned them off. Something in my gut said the mountain wasn't safe today, but I had no real reason to deny them access, and besides, the Gunsight route was on the opposite side from where Tom's team had vanished. Around noon, my radio squawked with Jeff's voice, tight with panic. "Ranger Station, this is Jeff Hamilton. We need help up here. Lisa's hurt." I grabbed my medical kit and climbing gear. "What's your location, Jeff?" "Gunsight route, about 3 pitches up." Lisa was leading when his voice cut out in static. The climb to their position normally took me 20 minutes. I made it in 15, my lungs burning in the thin air. I could hear Jeff calling before I saw him, his voice echoing off the cliff faces in a way that sounded wrong. The echoes came back different than they should have, distorted and hollow. I found Jeff on a narrow ledge, cradling Lisa's unconscious form. Blood matted her blonde hair and her left leg bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. "What happened?" I asked, already checking her pulse and breathing. "She was placing protection about 10 feet above me," Jeff said, his words tumbling over each other. "Perfect placement in a solid crack. I watched her test it twice. Then the rock just moved." "Rock doesn't move, Jeff." "Did she fall? Hit her head?" "No, you don't understand." He grabbed my arm with shaking fingers. The crack closed. While she was placing the cam, the rock squeezed shut like a mouth. I looked up at the spot he was pointing to. Smooth quartzite face, no cracks anywhere, which was impossible. The Gunsight route follows a natural crack system from bottom to top. I'd climbed it myself 6 months ago, and the crack at that spot was wide enough to fit my whole hand inside. Lisa's gear was gone, not fallen to the bottom of the cliff. Gone, like it had never existed. "The crack was there," Jeff insisted. "I know it was there. Lisa got her protection placed, and then the rock just closed around her hand. She screamed and fell backward, ripping her hand free, but the gear—" He shook his head. It was like the mountain swallowed it. I helped Jeff rig a lowering system to get Lisa down to the base. She regained consciousness during the descent, mumbling about stone teeth and hungry rock. Shock and head trauma, I told myself. People say strange things when they're hurt. But when we reached the base, I looked back up at the route. The entire crack system that defined the gunsight climb was gone. 800 feet of natural handholds and protection placements had vanished, leaving behind only smooth, unclimbable stone. I radioed for a helicopter to take Lisa to the hospital, then helped Jeff pack their gear. He moved like a man in a trance, glancing constantly at the cliff face above us. 19 years I've been climbing, he whispered, as we waited for the medevac. Never seen anything like that. Rock doesn't behave that way, Patricia. Rock doesn't change. After the helicopter took them away, I stood alone at the base of the cliff. The afternoon sun cast sharp shadows across the quartzite face, highlighting every crack and ledge except for the root that should have been there, the root that had been there yesterday. I pulled out my camera and took pictures, though I wasn't sure what I'd tell my supervisor when I filed the report. How do you explain that a climbing route simply stopped existing? As the sun set, I heard sounds from higher up on the cliffs. Not wind or settling rock, something rhythmic and deliberate, like bones clicking together in a pattern. The sound echoed strangely in the gathering darkness, seeming to come from inside the mountain itself. I'd always prided myself on being rational, scientific. 19 years of mountain rescue had taught me that every accident has an explanation, every mystery has a solution. But standing there in the growing dark, listening to those impossible sounds, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood. Pure animal fear. The mountain was watching me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lisa's terrified face and heard Jeff's impossible story about rock that moved like a living thing. I kept telling myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe the crack system had been damaged by recent rain, causing a rock fall that sealed the openings. Maybe I was remembering the route wrong, but I'd climbed those rocks for 19 years. I knew every handhold, every crack, every place where you could rest on a narrow ledge. The gunsight route was gone, and that was impossible. Morning brought Dr. Elena Vasquez and her graduate students from West Virginia University. They were documenting traditional climbing routes for a guidebook project, photographing and mapping the cliff systems. Elena had been coming to Seneca Rocks for 15 years and knew the area almost as well as I did. "Patricia," she called as her team unpacked their gear. "Perfect timing. We're starting with the north face today. Should have the whole route system mapped by evening." I watched them sort their equipment, ropes, cameras, measuring tools, notebooks. Young, eager faces excited about spending a day on the rocks. I should have warned them. Should have closed the area until I understood what was happening. But what would I say? That climbing routes were disappearing? That rocks were moving like living things? Instead, I gave them the standard safety briefing and asked them to radio in every hour with position updates. At 10 a.m., Elena reported they'd reached the base of the North Face Direct and were beginning their photographic survey. At 11 a.m., her student Marcus radioed that they'd completed the first pitch documentation and were moving to the second. At noon, silence. I tried raising them on the radio every 10 minutes. Nothing. By 1 p.m., I was gearing up for another rescue when my radio finally crackled to life. "Patricia?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "Something's wrong up here." "What's your position, Elena?" I don't know where we are. The route changed. We were following the North Face Direct, the same climb I've done 20 times, and the holds just rearranged themselves." Static filled the radio for several seconds. Then Marcus's voice, high with panic. "Dr. Vasquez, look at the rock behind you." More static. Then Elena again, her scientific composure cracking. "Patricia, the cliff face is moving. I'm watching handholds disappear and new ones form. The rock is flowing like water." "Elena, stay calm. Drop a fixed line and rappel down to—" "We can't," Marcus interrupted. "Our ropes are stuck. They go into the rock face and just end." like the stone grew around them. I was already moving, grabbing my technical rescue gear and heading for the north face. The approach-ish trail seemed longer than usual, and the forest around me was dead quiet. No bird sounds, no insect noise, even the wind had stopped. When I reached the base of the cliff, I could see them, about 200 feet up, huddled together on what looked like a solid ledge. But as I watched through binoculars, I realized the ledge was moving, slowly rotating like a wheel. Elena and her students were trapped on living stone. "Elena, can you hear me?" I called through my megaphone. Her tiny voice drifted down. "Patricia, the rock is warm. It's breathing." I set up my rescue system, a complex arrangement of ropes and pulleys that would let me ascend the cliff face quickly. As I began climbing, I noticed my gear reacting strangely. Carabiners that should have clipped easily to bolt hangers required extra force, as if the metal was reluctant to connect. My rope felt heavier than it should, like something was pulling on it from below. 20 feet up, I placed a cam in what looked like a perfect crack. The metal device expanded to fit the opening, holding my weight securely. But when I weighted it to continue climbing, I felt the rock pulse around the gear like a giant heartbeat. 50 feet up, the holds began changing under my hands. Solid granite that had been carved by centuries of weather started flowing like thick mud, reshaping itself as I touched it. A handhold would be perfect for my grip, then slowly morph into something that wanted to trap my fingers. I could hear Elena and her students above me, their voices tight with terror as they watched the rock face rearrange itself around them. The ledge they stood on had formed a low wall, preventing them from moving in any direction. "The rock is collecting us," Elena called down. "Like specimens." That's when I saw the first bone. It jutted from the cliff face about 10 feet to my right, yellowed with age but unmistakably human. A femur, perfectly preserved in the quartzite matrix. As I stared, more bones became visible, emerging from the rock like a slow-motion archaeological excavation. Ribs, vertebrae, skulls with EMP, tie sockets that seemed to track my movement. The bones weren't random. They formed patterns, geometric arrangements that spoke of intelligence and purpose. Some were old, weathered smooth by decades of exposure. Others looked fresh, still showing traces of tissue and hair. I recognized Tom Murphy's distinctive climbing helmet partially embedded in the stone about 40 feet up. His skull was still inside it. The mountain wasn't just killing climbers. It was keeping them. My radio crackled with Elena's voice, now barely recognizable. "Patricia, there are people in the rock. Dozens of them. They're all looking at us." I looked up and saw what she meant. The cliff face was revealing its collection. Climbers from decades past, their bodies perfectly preserved in the living stone. Their eyes were open, and they were moving, turning their heads to watch the new additions to their number. The rock pulsed again, stronger this time. My ropes began sinking into the stone as if the cliff face was digesting them. I had maybe 5 minutes before my anchor points disappeared completely. "Elena, I'm coming up," I called, climbing faster than I'd ever climbed in my life. But the mountain had other plans. The cliff face rippled like water, and suddenly I was falling. Not the clean fall you'd expect from failed protection. The rock itself was dropping away beneath me, creating a vertical tunnel that swallowed me whole. I slammed into a narrow ledge 30 feet down, my shoulder screaming with pain as I rolled to absorb the impact. My headlamp beam revealed that I was inside the mountain, in a cavern that hadn't existed moments before. The walls pulsed with a slow, organic rhythm, and they were lined with bones, thousands of them, arranged in spiraling patterns that hurt to look at directly. Climbers from across the decades, their gear still attached, their bodies positioned like musin displays. Some of the skeletons moved when my light hit them, creaking joints turning toward me with mechanical precision. At the center of the cavern stood 3 figures that made my breath catch in my throat. Tom Murphy, Sarah Chen, and Mike Rodriguez, but wrong, so wrong. Their bodies were assembled from multiple skeletons, extra ribs and mismatched limbs creating impossible anatomy. Their eyes glowed with cold light, and when they moved, bones clicked together like wind chimes made of death. Patricia Redwood, Tom's voice came from a throat that was clearly not his own. 19 years on our mountain. We've been waiting for you. You're not Tom, I managed, groping for my radio. We are Tom. We are Sarah. We are Mike. We are all who have fed the stone. The three bone creatures moved closer, their footsteps echoing in impossible harmonies. The mountain hungers, Patricia. It has hungered since before the Cherokee walked these paths, before white men brought metal to scratch our faces. The cavern wall's pulse grew stronger, and I could feel the mountain's heartbeat through the stone beneath my feet. This wasn't just a predatory formation. It was alive, ancient, and intelligent. Elena and her students, I said. Let them go. They are already becoming part of us. Sarah's composite skeleton gestured toward the wall, where I could see the graduate students embedded in the stone, their bodies slowly sinking into the rock matrix. Elena was fighting the process, her hands still free, reaching desperately toward empty air. The Cherokee understood. Mike's bone assemblage continued. They fed us willingly, offered their dead so the living could pass safely. But your people take without giving, climb without permission, scrape our faces with metal, and leave scars that burn. I understood then. This wasn't random predation. It was payment. The mountain was collecting what it felt it was owed. What do you want? I asked. A willing offering, Tom replied. One who chooses to join us. In exchange, we will release the others and sleep for another generation. Elena's eyes met mine through the transparent stone that was slowly covering her face. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear but could understand. Don't. I thought about 19 years of mountain rescues, all the climbers I'd saved, all the families who'd gotten their loved ones back because I knew these rocks better than anyone. How many more would die if this thing kept feeding? If I stay, you'll let them live? All of them? They will climb again, the bone collectors promised in unison. But they will remember. They will teach others to ask permission before touching stone. They will know that some mountains require respect. I looked at my hands, calloused from nearly 2 decades of gripping rock. I'd given my life to these mountains already. Maybe it was time to give it literally. I accept. The bone collector smiled with multiple skulls. Then choose, Patricia Redwood. Join us willingly and become something greater than human. Fight us and feed us anyway, while your friends die watching. The cavern walls began closing in, rock flowing like thick liquid toward the center where I stood. Elena and her students started screaming, their voices echoing from inside the stone. I had seconds to decide. I pulled the emergency flare from my rescue kit and held it high. You want respect for the mountain? You'll get it, but not like this. I triggered the flare, filling the cavern with brilliant red light. The bone collectors shrieked and staggered backward, their composite forms seeming to lose cohesion in the harsh illumination. Iron and fire, I shouted over their screams. The Cherokee used iron and fire to bind spirits. That's why you hate our gear, isn't it? The metal burns you. I pulled every piece of metal gear from my harness, carabiners, pitons, my rescue knife, and hurled them at the bone creatures. Where the steel touched them, the ear forms began dissolving, individual bones separating and falling to the cavern floor. The mountain's heartbeat became irregular, panicked. Cracks appeared in the cavern walls, and I could hear Elena calling my name from somewhere beyond the stone. You will feed us eventually, Patricia Redwood, Tom's disintegrating voice promised. All who love these rocks join us in the end. The cavern collapsed inward, stone flowing like water, but instead of crushing me, it ejected me upward, spitting me out onto the cliff face where Elena and her students were pulling themselves free from the liquefying rock. Move, I shouted. Get off the mountain now. We rappelled down in record time, the cliff face writhing and reshaping itself behind us. By the time we reached the base, the entire north face had transformed into something unrecognizable. All familiar routes erased and replaced with smooth, unclimbable stone. Elena's students were crying, checking themselves for injuries that weren't there. Elena herself stared at the mountain with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just been shattered. "What was that thing?" she whispered. "Something old," I replied. "Something that's been here longer than we have, and something that's not done with us yet." The official report listed the incident as a geological instability event caused by unusual seismic activity. Elena and her students were treated for shock and exposure, their accounts dismissed as trauma-induced hallucinations. The climbing areas of Seneca Rocks were temporarily closed for safety assessment, and when they reopened 6 months later, many of the traditional routes had been permanently altered. I kept my job, but I changed how I did it. Now, when climbers come to get their permits, I tell them different stories. I talk about respecting the mountain, about asking permission before touching stone. I teach them to carry iron, not just for climbing, but for protection. Most think I'm just a superstitious old ranger sharing local folklore, but some listen. The smart ones, the ones who've spent enough time in the mountains to know that some places have their own rules. Elena went back to teaching at the university, but she never published her guidebook. Sometimes she calls me late at night asking if I think it's really over. I tell her what I know to be true. The bone collectors are still in there, waiting. The mountain still hungers. But we bought time. Maybe a generation, maybe more. I've trained 3 other rangers in what to look for. The signs that the mountain is waking up again. Climbing routes that change overnight. Gear that embeds itself in solid rock. The sound of bones clicking together in the wind. Tom Murphy's wife asks me sometimes if I think he suffered. I tell her no, that it was quick. But I don't tell her that I still see him sometimes, standing at the edge of the tree line, his composite skeleton watching new climbers with ancient, hungry eyes. The Cherokee were right. Some mountains are hungry for bones, but they can be appeased if you know how to feed them properly. I just hope the next ranger who takes my place understands that respect isn't just about following leave-no-trace principles. Sometimes respect means knowing when to offer something the mountain actually wants, and sometimes it means knowing when to stay away completely. Last week I found a bright red chalk bag embedded in the quartzite face, 40 feet up where no human hand could reach. Tom's lucky bag, the one his daughter gave him. It's been there for 3 months now. A warning to anyone smart enough to understand what it means. The mountain is waking up again. I've started carrying more iron in my gear, and I've been teaching the local climbing community some very old stories about asking permission before you touch stone. Most of them think I'm losing my mind, but the smart ones listen, and the smart ones know that some mountains require more than just technical skill to climb safely. They require sacrifice. I just hope that when my time comes to feed the mountain, I'll have the courage to do it right, to choose instead of being chosen. Because 19 years of mountain rescue has taught me one thing above all else. In the end, the mountain always gets what it wants. The only question is whether you give it willingly or whether it takes you anyway. My name is David Mountain Hawk, and I've been watching the mountains for 15 years. People think being a fire tower ranger is lonely work, but I've never minded the quiet. Up here on Spruce Knob, the highest point in West Virginia, you can see forever. On clear days, I can spot smoke from 40 miles away. The tower sits at 4,863 feet above sea level. It's a metal frame with a small glass cabin at the top where I spend my days watching for fires and recording weather. Radio every hour, check the wind, mark down temperature and humidity. Simple work that keeps the forests safe. My grandfather used to tell stories about these mountains. He was Cherokee, full blood, and he said his people considered Spruce Knob sacred. The mountains have a guardian, he'd say in his quiet voice. A watcher who keeps the balance. I loved those stories as a kid, but I figured they were just old tales. Native folklore, you know. I became a ranger after Grandpa died. Seemed right somehow, carrying on his love for these mountains. Mom always said I got his eyes, dark and serious, good for watching. She was half Cherokee herself, met my dad when he was logging up here in the 60s. August 1979 was the worst drought I'd ever seen. The humidity dropped so low my weather instruments could barely read it. Every day the fire danger climbed higher. Red flag warnings, burn bans, helicopter crews on standby. The whole forest felt like a tinderbox waiting for one spark. That's when the animals started acting strange. First it was the birds. Usually I'd see hawks riding the thermals, crows calling from the spruce trees. But for 3 days straight, nothing. The silence felt heavy, like the mountains were holding their breath. Then the deer began moving. Not the normal feeding patterns, they were running. Whole herds streaming down the mountainsides, heading east toward the valley. I radioed, headquarters in Elkins. Base, this is Spruce Knob. You getting any reports of animal migration? Something's got them spooked up here. Static crackled. Negative, Mountain Hawk. Probably just the drought. Animals know when to find water. But I'd seen drought before. This was different. The deer weren't just leaving, they were fleeing. Eyes wide, foam on their mouths, running like something was chasing them. Even the squirrels had gone quiet. On the 4th morning, I climbed up to start my watch. The sun was just breaking over the eastern ridges, painting the mountains gold and purple. I checked my instruments, radioed in the morning report, then settled in with my binoculars to scan for smoke. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a tree. Something tall and dark on Allegheny Mountain, maybe 8 miles northeast. But trees don't move. This thing was walking across the ridgeline, taking enormous steps from peak to peak. Each stride covered what looked like a 1/4 mile. I grabbed my telescope and swung it around. The figure was massive. Had to be at least 200 feet tall. It looked almost human, but made of rock and wood, with what seemed like smaller mountains for shoulders. As I watched, it stopped and turned toward Spruce Knob. Even from 8 miles away, I could feel it looking at me. My hands shook as I lowered the telescope. Heat mirages, I told myself. The drought was playing tricks with the air. I'd been up here too long, seeing things that weren't there. But when I looked again, the figure was gone. I didn't report it. What would I say? Base, there's a 200-foot giant walking around out there. They'd have me down for psychological evaluation within the hour. The rest of that day passed quietly. Too quietly. No wind, no birds, no insects. Just me and the endless blue sky and the feeling that something vast was watching from the MO. Untains. The next morning, I woke up to my radio crackling with chatter. Helicopter pilot Jim Kowalski was flying a supply run to the ranger station at Seneca Rocks when he spotted something. Strange. Base, you're not going to believe this. I'm looking at footprints on the north face of Allegheny Mountain. Huge ones. Gotta be 20 feet long each. I grabbed my radio. Jim, this is David up on Spruce Knob. How many prints you seeing? Maybe a dozen, heading southwest toward your position. Spaced about, Jesus, 1/4 mile apart. What kind of equipment makes tracks like that? Base came on. No heavy machinery scheduled for that area. Must be natural rock formations, some kind of erosion pattern. But I knew better. I'd seen the thing making those tracks. After the radio chatter died down, I spent the morning watching through my telescope. Sure enough, I could make out the prints Jim had spotted. Dark gashes in the mountainside, too regular to be natural. They led in a straight line toward Spruce Knob. Around noon, the temperature hit 98 degrees, hottest I'd ever recorded up here. The humidity dropped to 8%. Fire weather doesn't get more dangerous than that. I was sending hourly updates to base, warning them to have crews ready. That's when I heard the voice. It came on the wind, speaking Cherokee. I recognized a few words from Grandpa's lessons: mountain, balance, warning. The voice sounded like his, but deeper, older, like it was coming from inside the earth itself. I checked my radio, thinking maybe I was picking up some old recording, but the frequency was clear. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the mountains. David. Now it spoke English with Grandpa's accent. You must listen. The balance is breaking. Grandpa? I whispered, feeling foolish. He'd been dead 5 years. The drought has awakened the guardian. He walks to restore what has been lost. You are the bridge between worlds. Before I could respond, the voice faded. I was alone again with the heat and silence. That afternoon I spotted smoke rising from Blackwater Canyon, about 15 miles south. My first fire of the season. I radioed it in and watched helicopters scramble to dump water on the flames. Small fire contained quickly, but it reminded me how dry everything was. As the sun set, I climbed down from the tower to check the area around the base. That's when I found them, footprints in the dirt around my cabin, not human prints. These were huge, at least 3 feet long and deep enough that whatever made them had to weigh tons. But the strangest part was how old they looked. Not fresh tracks from today, but weathered and worn, like they'd been there for years. Moss grew in some of them. Small trees sprouted from others, as if something massive had walked through here long ago, and the forest had grown around its passage. I followed the track line with my flashlight. They led up the mountain slope, spaced impossibly far apart. The stride length was over 20 feet. No human could step that far, even running downhill. Back in my cabin, I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I pulled out Grandpa's old journals, pages filled with Cherokee stories and mountain folklore. Most of it was in his native language, but I found one passage in English. The mountain walker sleeps in the high places, older than the Cherokee, older than the trees. When the balance breaks, when the earth cries out in pain, the walker wakes. He rights what has been wronged, but the cost is always high. I read it 3 times before closing the journal. Outside, the wind had picked up, making the tower creak and sway. But underneath the wind, I could swear I heard footsteps, slow, heavy steps that shook the ground. I didn't sleep that night. The morning brought 3 new fires. Smoke columns rose from 3 different mountains, all within my watch area. The radio never stopped crackling as fire crews scrambled to reuse. Spawned. Helicopters buzzed overhead like angry hornets, racing between water sources and flame fronts. Spruce Knob, this is base. We need continuous spotting reports. These fires are moving fast. I spent the day glued to my telescope, tracking the blazes and radioing coordinates. But between the smoke columns, I kept seeing movement on the mountains. The giant figure was closer now, maybe 5 miles out, and it was walking directly toward me. By afternoon, all 3 fires had merged into one massive blaze consuming the southern ridge. The smoke was so thick I could barely see 2 miles in any direction. That's when Jim Kowalski's helicopter appeared through the haze. "David, you need to evacuate. That fire's jumping ridge lines faster than we can stop it." "Negative, Jim. I can still do my job from up here." "It's not the fire I'm worried about." His voice dropped low. "I keep seeing something big moving through the smoke. Something that ain't right." I keyed my radio. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've been flying these mountains for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Looks like a person, but tall as a mountain, walking right through the flames like they're not even there." Before I could respond, the radio went dead. Not just Jim's channel, every frequency. The whole radio was silent except for a low humming sound like the earth itself was vibrating. The smoke began to clear, blown away by a wind that came from nowhere. And there, standing on the ridge where the fire had been, was the mountain walker. It was even bigger than I'd thought. 200 feet tall at least, shaped like a man but made of living rock and ancient trees. Pine needles formed its hair. Boulders were its joints, and its face looked like every mountain I'd ever known, weathered and wise and incredibly old. It took 1 step toward Spruce Knob. The ground shook. Trees swayed. My tower creaked and groaned like a ship in a storm. Another step. Closer now. I could see its eyes. Deep caves that seemed to hold starlight. When it looked at me, I felt like I as seeing the birth of the mountains themselves. David Mountain Hawk. Its voice came from everywhere. The wind, the rocks, the trees themselves. Grandson of Joseph Mountain Hawk. You carry his blood, his knowledge. I found my voice somehow. What do you want? The balance is broken. Drought, fire, death. The earth cries out for healing. You will help me restore what was lost. I'm just a fire watcher. I don't have any power. The walker took another step. Now it stood directly across the valley from my tower, close enough that I could see the moss and lichen covering its stone skin. Small animals lived in the crevices of its body, birds, squirrels, even a family of raccoons making their home in what might have been its chest. Your grandfather made a promise. His bloodline would help maintain the balance. You are the last of his blood in these mountains. I thought of Grandpa's stories, all those tales I'd dismissed as folklore. What kind of promise? When the white men came, they brought changes the earth could not bear, mines that poisoned the water, clear cuts that stripped the mountains bare. Your grandfather spoke for his people, made an agreement. The Cherokee would help the mountain walker watch over the land. In return, we would sleep until truly needed. Another step. The walker was close enough now that its shadow fell across my tower. I should have been terrified, but instead I felt a strange peace. This was what Grandpa had been preparing me for my whole life. The drought is not natural, the walker continued. It is the earth's fever, fighting poison in its veins. Strip mines to the south leak acid into the groundwater. Coal plants to the east pour death into the sky. The mountains are dying, David Mountain Hawk. Will you help me heal them? I thought of all the dead streams I'd seen, the mountaintops stripped bare by mining, the forests withering in the poisoned air. What do I need to do? The walker smiled, and when it did, flowers bloomed in the cracks of its stone face. First, we must end the drought. The earth needs waters. Flush the poison from its veins. It raised one massive hand to the sky. Clouds began to gather from nowhere, dark storm clouds heavy with rain. Lightning flickered between its fingers. Thunder rumbled in its chest. But the fires will be cleansed by clean water, not smothered. The forest will burn and grow again, as it has for 10,000 years. This is natural. The poison is not. The storm clouds thickened overhead. The first fat raindrops began to fall, hissing as they hit the hot metal of my tower. The walker lowered its hand and looked at me with those ancient eyes. Your part comes after the rain. There are choices ahead, David Mountain Hawk. Choices your grandfather prepared you for, though he could not tell you directly. What choices? But the walker was already fading, becoming transparent like morning mist. When the time comes, you will know. Trust the old ways. Trust your blood. The storm broke with a fury I'd never seen. Rain fell in sheets, turning the dust to mud, filling the dry stream beds, soaking deep into the earth. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the mountains. And in the heart of the storm, I could swear I heard my grandfather laughing. The rain fell for 3 days straight. Not the gentle shower the mountains needed, but a biblical deluge that turned streams into rivers and sent mudslides rolling down the mountainsides. The fire crews pulled back to safe zones while the earth drank deeply for the first time in months. On the third day, the rain stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The sky cleared to brilliant blue, and the mountains looked different, greener somehow, alive in a way they hadn't been for weeks. That's when the officials came. 3 black SUVs wound up the mountain road, splashing through puddles and mud. I watched them through my binoculars, wondering who would come all the way up to Spruce Knob in vehicles like theirs. Park Service drove green trucks. Forest Service used pickups. These looked like government. I was right. The lead SUV disgorged 4 people in dark suits, 3 men and a woman, all wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. They climbed the tower stairs like they owned the place. David Mountain Hawk? The woman spoke first. She was young, maybe 30, with the kind of confidence that comes from power. I'm Agent Sarah Chen, Environmental Protection Agency. We need to talk. They crowded into my small cabin, making the space feel even smaller. One of the men set up some kind of recording device while another took photos of everything. My equipment, my grandfather's journals. even the mud prints outside. "We understand you've been reporting unusual weather phenomena," Agent Chen said. "Unprecedented rainfall, abnormal wind patterns, temperature fluctuations that don't match any known meteorological models." I chose my words carefully. It's been a strange month. The drought, then the storms. But weather's unpredictable up here. "What about the reports of large footprints, sightings of unusual figures in the mountains?" My blood went cold. How did they know about that? "I don't know what you mean." Agent Chen opened a tablet and showed me photos. Aerial shots of the giant footprints, satellite images showing the walker's path across the mountains, even a blurry helicopter photo that might have been the giant figure itself. "We have extensive documentation, Mr. Mountain Hawk. Radar anomalies, seismic readings, electromagnetic disturbances. Something very large has been moving through these mountains, something that doesn't appear in any of our databases." One of the men leaned forward. "We also know about your grandfather's connections to local Native American folklore, stories about mountain guardians, elemental spirits, old superstitions that might explain what you think you've been seeing." The insult in his voice made my hands clench. My grandfather's stories weren't superstitions. "Of course not," Agent Chen said smoothly. "We're very interested in Native American oral traditions. They often contain valuable environmental information passed down through generations. Perhaps your grandfather's stories could help us understand what's really happening here." I looked around the cabin at these four strangers pawing through my life, and I understood. They weren't here to learn. They were here to control, to take whatever was happening on my mountain and lock it away in some government facility. "I think you should leave," I said. Agent Chen's smile never wavered. "Mr. Mountain Hawk, we're prepared to offer you a substantial consulting fee for your cooperation. Full relocation assistance, a position with the EPA, excellent benefits. And if I say no?" The woman's smile faded. "Then we'll have to consider you a security risk. The phenomena you've witnessed could have national implications. We can't allow uncontrolled information to reach the public." One of the men stepped toward the door, blocking my exit. Another moved to the radio equipment. The message was clear. I wasn't leaving until I cooperated. That's when the mountain shook. Not an earthquake, something deeper, like the earth itself was stirring. Outside, the trees began to sway though there was no wind. Birds took flight from every branch, filling the sky with beating wings. Agent Chen grabbed her tablet as coffee mugs rattled off my table. "What's happening?" Through the window I could see him rising from the valley floor, the mountain walker, bigger than before, pulling himself up from the earth like he'd been sleeping beneath the mountains. Dirt and rocks cascaded from his shoulders as he stood to his full height. "Oh my God," one of the men whispered. The walker's voice rumbled like distant thunder, speaking Cherokee words that seemed to come from the bedrock itself. I understood enough to get the meaning. "Choose, grandson. Choose now." Agent Chen was frantically tapping her tablet, probably trying to call for backup. The men were pulling out weapons, small, useless things against something made of living stone. I thought of my grandfather's words. The Cherokee would help the mountain walker watch over the land, not the government, not outsiders who saw only resources to exploit. The Cherokee, my people. The choice was simple. I walked to my radio and smashed it with my fist, sparks flying from the broken circuits. Then I opened my grandfather's journal to a page I'd memorized years ago and began to read aloud in Cherokee, words I'd learned at his knee. "What are you doing?" Agent Chen shouted. The walker's eyes blazed like stars as I spoke the old promises, renewing the covenant my grandfather had made. The agents backed against the far wall as the cabin filled with a presence older than human civilization. Outside, the walker smiled and placed one massive hand on the mountainside. Where he touched, springs bubbled up from solid rock. Clean water, pure and cold, flowing down to fill the valleys below. "I choose the mountains," I said to Agent Chen. "I choose the old ways." The woman raised her tablet like a shield. "You don't understand the forces you're dealing with. This could destabilize the entire region." But her words were lost as the walker began to sing. A sound like wind through ancient forests, like water over stones, like the earth itself dreaming. The agents stumbled from the cabin, clutching their equipment, and fled down the mountain road in their black SUVs. I never saw them again. That was 43 years ago. I'm an old man now, 82 years old, still living in my cabin below Spruce Knob. They automated the fire tower in the 90s, filled it with cameras and sensors, but I stay on as a cultural consultant. The Park Service thinks I'm just a harmless old Indian keepy, among the tourists, entertained with folklore, if they only knew. The mountain walker returned to his sleep after the government people left, but he never went far. Sometimes I feel him stirring, beneath the mountain when strip mining companies get too close, or when developers try to build on sacred ground. The springs he opened still flow pure and clear, feeding streams that were dead for decades. The mountains are healthier now. The wildlife came back first, deer, bear, even elk returning to valleys they hadn't seen for a century. The trees grew stronger, more resistant to blight and disease. Scientists call it unexplained ecological recovery, but I know the truth. The walker keeps his promise, and I keep mine. 3 times over the years, I've had to wake him. Once when a coal company tried to blast through a sacred burial ground. Once when a chemical spill threatened to poison the watershed, and once when developers wanted to put a resort on top of Spruce Knob itself. Each time, I spoke the old words my grandfather taught me. Each time, the walker rose to protect the land. And each time, the threats mysteriously disappeared, permits denied, companies bankrupt, projects abandoned for unforeseen environmental concerns. I trained my nephew Thomas in the old ways before he moved to Colorado. My grandniece Sarah knows some of the stories, though she lives in the city now and thinks they're just family legends. But the blood runs true. When my time comes, one of them will return to take up the watch. The government still comes around sometimes. Different agencies, different faces, but the same hunger to control what they don't understand. I tell them what they want to hear. Stories about unusual weather patterns, animal behavior, seismic activity. They take their measurements and write their reports and never see what's really there. Last month, a young ranger named Michael started working the area. Cherokee boy from North Carolina, about the same age I was when I first saw the walker. He's been asking questions about the old stories about his grandmothers. Here's tales of mountain spirits. I think he might be the one to continue the watch when I'm gone. The mountains have long memories. They remember the Cherokee who walked these ridges for thousands of years. They remember the promises made and kept, the balance maintained through respect and cooperation rather than conquest and control. And deep beneath Spruce Knob, older than human civilization, patient as stone, the mountain walker sleeps and dreams of forests yet to grow. But he's always listening, always ready to wake. Sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I can hear him breathing. A sound like distant avalanches, like the earth itself sighing in its sleep. And I know that as long as there are mountains, as long as there are people willing to keep the old promises, the balance will hold. The mountains are alive, and they are watching. Remember that the next time you walk in the deep woods, when the trees seem too quiet and the shadows fall too long, show respect. Take only what you need. Leave no trace of your passing, because the watcher is still there, waiting in the high places, and he remembers everything. My name is Thomas Whitaker, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 17 years now. Some folks think that's a long time to spend walking the same trails and checking the same old cabins. But when your great-great-grandfather helped clear the first fields in Cades Cove back in 1818, this place gets in your blood. The cove sits like a big green bowl between the mountains, 11 miles of loop road, winding past log cabins and old churches that tell the story of families who lived here for over a century. My family was one of them. The Whitakers farmed here, raised children here, buried their dead here. Then in 1934, the government decided our home should be a national park instead. Most rangers get assigned wherever they're needed. Me? I asked for Cades Cove specifically. Someone needs to tell the real story of this place, not just point tourists toward the pretty views and gift shop. These cabins aren't just old buildings. They're what's left of a whole community that got swept away so city folks could come look at mountains. I learned the Park Service version of history first, all neat dates and visitor facts. But my grandmother told different stories. She'd sit on her porch in Maryville, where the government moved her family, and talk about haints that still walked the cove after dark. Hollow men, she called them, working farms that didn't exist anymore. Tommy, she'd say, rocking in that old chair, some folks just can't let go of home, even when home's gone. I never believed her stories. Granny was 93 when she died, and old mountain people have always had tales about spirits and such. I figured the government taking her childhood home just made her think crazy things. I was wrong about that. October 1976 started strange. We'd had 3 weeks of cold weather that shouldn't have come till November, and fog that hung around past. Noon most days, the tourists loved it, made the mountains look spooky for Halloween season. But it bothered the animals. Deer stayed deep in the woods. Bears moved through fast instead of feeding in the meadows. Even the birds seemed quieter. That's when visitors started telling me about the settlers. "Ranger, we saw the neatest thing yesterday," a lady from Ohio told me at the visitor center. "There were people in old-fashioned clothes working around that cabin with the big barn. The kids were so excited to see real mountain people." I knew she meant the Elijah Oliver place. Problem was, we don't have living history programs at that site. Haven't had reenactors there in 2 years. "Ma'am, you might have seen park maintenance folks," I said. "Sometimes the work clothes look old-fashioned from a distance." But she shook her head. No, these were definitely period costumes. A man in overalls and a woman in a long dress. They had children playing in the yard. When we got closer to take pictures, they just weren't there anymore. 3 more families told me similar stories that week. Always the same thing. People in 1800s clothing working around the historic sites, vanishing when approached. I started doing extra patrols, thinking maybe we had some amateur historians sneaking in after hours. That's when I found the footprints. The tracks were around the Oliver cabin on a Tuesday morning in late October. Fresh prints in the soft earth by the porch, like someone had been walking there at dawn. But these weren't hiking boot prints or work boot prints. They looked like the kind of shoes people wore 100 years ago, narrow and pointed, with smooth leather soles. I knelt down and measured them with my pocket ruler, size 9, maybe 10. A man's shoe, but old style. The kind of thing you might see in a museum display about pioneer life. More strange, there were tiny futsio. T-prints too. Children's shoes, old-fashioned like the adult ones. A whole family had been walking around this empty cabin. I radioed Jenny Morrison, the other ranger working the cove, that day. "Jenny, you seen any reenactors or living history folks around the Oliver place?" "Negative, Tom. Why?" "Got some unusual tracks here. Might have people camping where they shouldn't be." "Want me to come take a look?" "Nah, I'll check the other sites first. If we got people playing dress-up, they might be at more than one location." I spent the rest of that morning checking every historic building in the cove. The primitive Baptist church, the John Cable Mill, the Becky Cable House. At each one, I found the same thing: old-style footprints around the buildings, like families in period clothing had been walking there. At the cable mill, I found something that made my skin crawl. Fresh wood shavings around the grinding stones, like someone had been working the mill. But the water wheel hadn't turned in decades. The creek barely flowed through there anymore. I was starting to feel watched. You know that feeling when someone's looking at you, but you turn around and nobody's there? I kept getting that all morning, especially near the old cemeteries scattered through the cove. The temperature started dropping around noon, even though the sun was shining. My radio began picking up static, but underneath the white noise, I could swear I heard something else. Music, maybe. Old-time fiddle and banjo, faint and far away. That evening I stayed late to see if our mystery visitors would show up. I parked my truck behind some trees near the Oliver cabin and settled in to wait. The fog started rolling in around 6 o'clock, thicker than usual. At 7:30, I saw lights. Not electric lights. the warm, flickering glow of oil lamps and candles in the cabin windows. But that was impossible. The historic buildings don't have electricity, and we sure don't light them up for decoration. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the cabin. The closer I got, the brighter those lights seemed, and the more I could hear sounds coming from inside, voices talking low, children laughing, the scrape of chairs on wooden floors. When I was maybe 50 feet away, I heard a man's voice call out, "Sarah, supper's about ready. Call the young'uns in." A woman answered from somewhere behind the cabin. "They're just finishing the chores, Daniel. Give them another minute." My heart started beating fast. These people sounded real, solid, like they belonged there. But the Oliver cabin has been empty for 40 years. I clicked on my flashlight and pointed it at the front door. The lights went out. The voices stopped. The only sound was wind in the trees and my own breathing. I walked up to the cabin and checked every window, every door. Empty. Cold. No sign anyone had been there. But when I got back to my truck, I could smell wood smoke in the air. And somewhere in the distance, I heard a child crying. The next morning, I found Jenny at the visitor center looking pale and shaky. "Tom, I need to tell you something. Yesterday evening after my shift, I decided to drive the loop one more time. Check on things." "Yeah? Find anything?" "I saw them, Tom. The people in old clothes. A whole family working in the field behind the John Cable house. A man plowing with 2 mules, woman hanging laundry, kids playing in the yard." I set down my coffee. "What time was this?" "Just before sunset, maybe 7 o'clock. I stopped the truck and watched them for maybe 5 minutes. They looked so normal, like they belonged there." "What happened when you approached?" "That's the thing. I didn't approach. Something told me not to. The man plowing, he looked up at me and waved. Big smile, like he was greeting a neighbor. But his face," she shuddered. "It was like looking at an old photograph, faded and gray." Jenny had been a park ranger for 8 years. She wasn't the type to make up stories or see things that weren't there. "Did you get any pictures?" "I tried, but when I looked through the camera, there was nothing there, just empty fields. Soon as I put the camera down, I could see them again." That day I decided to research the families who used to live in Cades Cove. The Park Service has detailed records of all the residents who were forced to move out in the 1930s. I spent my lunch break in the office going through old files and photographs. What I found made my blood run cold. In a 1925 photograph labeled Cable Family Harvest, I saw the exact same scene Jenny had described: a man plowing with mules, woman hanging clothes, children playing in the yard. The man in the photo was Daniel Cable, age 34. He was waving at the camera with the same big smile. According to the records, Daniel Cable died in 1931, 3 years before his family was forced to leave their home. I drove back to the cove that afternoon with a sick feeling in my stomach. The fog was rolling in early again and the temperature was dropping fast. My radio started crackling as soon as I passed the visitor center. At the Primitive Baptist Church, I found the doors standing wide open. This was impossible. We keep all the historic buildings locked to protect them from vandalism. I'm one of only 3 people with keys to that church. I walked inside, flashlight ready. The pews were arranged like someone had just finished a service. Hymnals were open on the seats. The smell of old wood and candle wax filled the air. On the pulpit, I found a Bible open to Psalm 23. In the margin, someone had written in faded pencil, "For the folks who can't find their way home." That's when I heard the singing. Voices outside the church, maybe a dozen people, singing Amazing Grace in the old mountain style. Slow and mournful, the way my grandmother used to sing it. I stepped outside and saw them. A congregation of people in Sunday clothes from another century. Men in dark suits and worn boots. Women in long dresses with their hair pinned up. Children fidgeting beside the parents. All of them facing the church, singing together. But they were see-through, like looking at people through frosted glass. And their faces. God, their faces were like old daguerreotypes, gray and blurred around the edges. One of the women turned to look at me. I recognized her from an old photograph in the park files. Mary Jane Oliver, died 1929. She smiled and nodded, like she was inviting me to join them for worship. I ran, didn't walk fast, didn't make an excuse. I turned around and ran for my truck like a scared kid. But as I drove away, I could still hear them singing. That night, I called my grandmother's sister, Aunt Pearl, who was 91 and still sharp as a tack. Aunt Pearl, did Granny ever tell you why she thought there were spirits in Cades Cove? Oh, honey, it wasn't just your Granny who knew about the hollow men. Lots of the old folks who got moved out, they'd come back sometimes, drive through in their cars just to see the place. They'd tell stories about seeing their dead relatives still working the farms, still living like nothing had changed. But why? Why would spirits stay in a place like that? Tommy, think about it. These families lived in that cove for over 100 years. Their whole world was those fields and cabins. When the government made them leave, it broke something in them. Some of the old folks, they died of broken hearts within a few years of moving out. So the spirits are what? Angry? Not angry, honey. Homesick. They're so homesick they can't rest. They keep trying to live the lives they had before everything changed. The next day was Saturday, our busiest day for visitors. I tried to act normal, checking on tourists and maintaining the sights. But every shadow made me jump, and every old building felt like it was watching me. Around 4 o'clock, a family from Georgia found me near the cable mill. "Ranger, there's something wrong with the Whitaker cabin," the father said. "Our kids want to see it, but there's smoke coming from the chimney. Are you having a demonstration today?" My heart stopped. The Whitaker cabin was my family's old home. I hadn't been there in 3 days. "Where exactly did you see smoke?" "Up the road about a mile. Old log cabin with a stone chimney. There's definitely a fire burning in there." I drove up to my family's old place with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Sure enough, gray smoke was rising from the chimney. The windows glowed with warm light, and I could hear sounds coming from inside. Footsteps, voices, the clank of pots and pans. Someone was cooking dinner in my great-great-grandfather's house. I sat in the truck for maybe 10 minutes, trying to work up the courage to go inside. Finally, I got out and walked to the front door. It was standing open. Inside, the cabin looked exactly like it did in old family photographs. Furniture that had been moved out decades ago. Pots hanging by the fireplace. A woman's dress laid out on the bed. At the kitchen table, a man was sitting with his back to me. He wore dark pants, held up with suspenders, and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His hair was gray and thinning. "Been wondering when you'd come see me, Thomas." I knew that voice. I'd heard it in family stories my whole life. "Great-granddaddy Ezekiel?" He turned around, and I was looking at my own face, aged by 60 years, and faded like an old photograph. Same nose, same jaw, same green eyes. "Sit down, boy. We need to talk." I should have run. Every instinct told me to get out of that house and never come back. But this was my family. This was the man who'd cleared these fields with his own hands. I sat down across from him at the table. "You're dead," I said. "I suppose that's true enough. Died in 1932, right here in this room. Heart gave out during the winter." He gestured around the cabin. "But I never left." "Why?" "Same reason none of us left. This is our home, Thomas. Our real home. When they made us mow out, when they said this land belonged to the government now, well, some things can't be moved." I looked around the cabin. It felt more real than anything I'd experienced in years. The warmth from the fireplace, the smell of cornbread baking, the sound of wind in the chinking between the logs. The other families, the ones people have been seeing. "We're all here, boy. The Cables, the Olivers, the Gregorys, all of us. Still working our farms, still raising our children, still living the way we're supposed to live. But you're scaring people. Visitors are reporting strange things." Ezekiel's face changed, became harder. "Visitors. Strangers coming to gawk at our homes like we're some kind of museum display. They don't belong here. This is a national park now, great-granddaddy. It belongs to everyone. No. His voice was sharp as a blade. It belongs to us. It always belonged to us. We cleared this land. We worked it. We bled for it. Some paper from Washington doesn't change that. I realized then what the hollow men really were. Not evil spirits or monsters. Just people who loved their home so much they couldn't accept losing it. They were stuck, trapped between life and death by their own refusal to let go. You have to move on, I said. You can't stay here forever. Can't we? Ezekiel smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. Thomas, you're a Whitaker. This is your place too. Your real place. Not out there in the world they built over our bones, but here. With your family. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, warmer, more welcoming. I could smell my great-grandmother's cooking, hear my grandfather's voice calling from the barn. All the Whitakers who had lived and died in this valley were here waiting for me. You could stay, boy. Become one of us. Help us keep the old ways alive. For a moment, I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to take off my ranger uniform and put on overalls and spend forever working the family farm. The modern world suddenly seemed like a nightmare of concrete and car exhaust and strangers. But then I thought about Jenny and the visitors who came here to learn about mountain history and all the real people living real lives in the present. No, I said, I can't stay. Ezekiel's face darkened. Then you're not family. You're just another stranger trying to take our home away. He stood up, and suddenly he didn't look like my grandfather anymore. His face was gray and hollow. His eyes were black holes, and his hands reached for me like claws. If you won't join us willingly, Thomas, you'll join us anyway. I don't remember exactly how I got out of that cabin. One minute Ezekiel was reaching for me with those hollow, grasping hands, and the next I was running through the woods in the dark, branches tearing at my clothes. When I finally stopped running, I was at the little cemetery behind the primitive Baptist church, the same cemetery where most of my family was buried, including Ezekiel himself. I stood there in the fog and the cold, looking at tombstones I'd read 100 times. Ezekiel Whitaker, 1859 to 1932, beloved husband and father. Sarah Jane Whitaker, 1862 to 1934. She rests in the arms of Jesus. That's when I understood what needed to happen. Great-granddaddy, I called out to the empty graveyard. I know you can hear me. The fog swirled, and slowly shapes began to appear among the tombstones. Not just Ezekiel, but dozens of people. All the families who had lived in Cades Cove, all the folks who couldn't let go. You don't belong in those cabins anymore, I said. Your homes are gone, but you're not gone. You're here, where you're supposed to be, at rest. We want to go home, said a woman I recognized as Mary Cable. We just want to go home. You are home, I told them. This ground, this cemetery, this is where the Cove people belong now. Not working farms that don't exist, not living in houses that belong to history. Here, with your families, at peace. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Ezekiel stepped forward. You promise you'll remember us, boy? Tell our stories, right? I promise. Tell them we weren't just exhibits in their park. We were people. We had lives here. I will. One by one, the hollow men began to fade. Not disappearing angry or scared, but settling down into the earth like folks lying down to sleep after a long day's work. The last thing I saw was Ezekiel, standing by his own gravestone. Take care of this place, Thomas. Don't let them forget us completely. Then he was gone, and I was alone in the cemetery with just the wind and the fog. I filed my report the next Monday. Said there had been some problems with people trespassing on the historic sites, but the situation was resolved. My supervisor didn't ask many questions. The strange sightings stopped after that night. Visitors still come to Cades Cove by the thousands, taking pictures and learning about mountain history. But they don't see hollow men working the fields anymore. Sometimes, though, on foggy October evenings when I'm doing my final patrol, I'll catch a glimpse of movement near the old cemeteries. Nothing scary or wrong, just peaceful. Like people visiting the graves of their families. I still work in Cades Cove. Probably always will. But now when I give tours, I make sure to tell the real stories about the families who lived here, who loved this place so much they couldn't bear to leave. About how home isn't just a place on a map, but something that lives in your heart. And late at night, when the park is closed and the mountains are quiet, I keep my promise to my great-grandfather. I remember the hollow men of Cades Cove, and I make sure they're finally at rest.